moving on to the big topic of the week now. So with James Gunn being fired from Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, I thought I'd look at some films that have lost directors in the past, whether it be in production or before production. So the whole point of this is to show that maybe James Gunn leaving Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 isn't exactly a bad thing. Maybe there is hope. So let's get straight into it. The first film is AntMan. Originally, AntMan was going to be directed by Edgar Wright. He wrote the script as well. And Edgar Wright, very much an auteur filmmaker. He comes in, he puts his own stamp on things. You can tell it's an Edgar Wright film. And before filming went underway, he departed the project. I can't remember if he was fired or if he left. But basically they said creative differences. That could mean a whole bunch of things, but normally it just means they didn't get on. So Peyton Reed came in, he rewrote the script with Paul Rudd, and they filmed AntMan. And ever since then, AntMan, in my opinion, is a pretty good film. It's not one of the best MCU films, it's certainly not one of the worst though. But there's been a lot of arguments about whether or not you can see this is an Edgar Wright thing, this is a Peyton Reed thing. The bottom line is, Edgar Wright never actually filmed any of this film, and we don't know how much of his script ended up in the final film either. So this is not an Edgar Wright film, but it worked out well in the end anyway. The next one, Solo: A Star Wars Story. Now this actually was pretty recent. It was Phil Lord and Chris Miller, famous for 21 Jump Street and so on and so forth. Now I want to get this clear, there's a lot of rumours and gossip about this one, but we don't actually know what really went on, and I don't think we're going to find out. Chances are when they lost their job they were forced to sign NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, so they probably can't say anything much about this. But rumours were that they were doing a lot of improvisation, and that was getting on the bad side of writer Lawrence Kasdan, who likes his scripts to be adapted the way that they're written. And Kathleen Kennedy apparently was not getting on with them at all. There was loads of problems with the acting not being up to par, and what was the other thing? Yeah, because of the improvisation, because they were having long running days, the budget for the film was just going up, up and up, and it was getting too expensive to make. So Kathleen Kennedy came down, got rid of them, and then they hired Ron Howard. Ron Howard, a very reliable, very well-liked individual in the industry. He, according to some of the cast, got things right back on track. He just got to work, filmed the remaining scenes. Apparently he reshot about 70% of the film as well. So in the end, Ron Howard got credited as the director. Lord and Miller still credited as executive producers though. So in the end, it worked out, I would say. It's a pretty decent science fiction action film. It's not one of the best Star Wars films. I think the problem is that the story and the characters just lack an emotional depth that the other Star Wars films all had. I would even say the prequels had that. But yeah, certainly not a bad film. I think when you really think about it, it's actually a miracle that this film turned out quite as well as it did. But again, a lot of it's rumours and speculation. So maybe things weren't quite as bad as they made out. Or maybe things were worse. Who knows? Next one, Spartacus. So originally Anthony Mann was directing this, but he was fired after 1 week because Kirk Douglas, who was producing this film, felt that Anthony Mann wasn't quite right for this. He had never done like a big blockbuster epic film before, and Kirk Douglas just thought that this was not his cup of tea. So they got rid of Anthony Mann, and then a young Stanley Kubrick came in. So this is a young Stanley Kubrick who hadn't quite made the name for himself yet. He wasn't the big auteur, he wasn't known for being in complete control of everything at this point. So Kirk Douglas was basically calling the shots, essentially. And turns out it's a classical, brilliant, great film. But it is very much a Kirk Douglas film. And after only 1 week, Anthony Mann was gone. So this was credited to Stanley Kubrick. The Wizard of Oz. Now, depending on where you look, it'll either say there were 4 directors or there were 6. What I've got down here is there were 4, because I don't know where the other 2 came from. The first director, he left after 2 weeks because, well, I say he left, he was probably fired, and after being fired, it turns out it was because the Tin Man actor got really ill, because it turns out once you put certain types of makeup on you, it can be pretty deadly, especially back in those days. So the Tin Man actor almost died, and that's why the original director was fired. George Cukor, I think I'm pronouncing that right, came in and changed a few things. So originally the plan was for Dorothy to be a blonde-headed, full makeup, sexy girl, and you can probably imagine that would be a little inappropriate and a little odd and weird. So they changed that. They gave her the ginger hair. They made her much more childlike. And that's pretty much all he done. He set like the tone and the mood of the film, but he never actually got behind the camera and filmed it. So then he left because of a scheduling conflict, because he had another project he had to go work on. Then another came in, and Victor Fleming, I believe his name was, he did the majority of the film, but he couldn't finish it because there was another scheduling conflict. And then the final guy, who was called King Vito, that's a really weird name, I don't know where he got that name from. I imagine it's not his real name, but I don't know. It might not even be a man, I don't know. But yeah, he done the most iconic scene in the film maybe, which was follow the yellow brick road, follow the yellow brick road. That's what he done. And that's pretty much it. So the film in the end, again, like Spartacus, a classic. This is probably a film that everyone's watched or at least knows about at some point. And wherever you look, there's 4, maybe 6 directors. They came together in the end miraculously. This film should not have been as good as it was. Apocalypse Now. So before Apocalypse Now was actually put into production, it was originally going to be directed and written by George Lucas. So that would have been a very different film. So much so that he wanted it to be a black comedy. He wanted it to be filmed on location in Vietnam during the Vietnam War. And as you can probably imagine, making a film during a war in a war zone might be a little dangerous. So the production basically said, nope, we're not doing that. It's too dangerous, too risky. So George Lucas left. Then Francis Ford Coppola picked it up quite a while later. He changed it a bit by making it an adaptation of In the Heart of Darkness. And yeah, it became a really weird, stylish, dark, moody war drama. And yeah, it wasn't all clear sailing, no, because this film has a notoriously infamous reputation for being a very tough and grueling production. I'm not going to get into that because that's a whole different story. But yeah, it's a good film, but it is tough. There's an extended version of it as well, which I haven't seen. And I haven't seen that because, one, the first film was just too long in the first place. So yeah. The final film that changed directors, Superman 2. This was Richard Donner's film. When they originally got the rights to Superman, they done the first film, Superman the movie, and this film back to back. And they were about 70% way through this film when the producers came in and said, you know what, we want this to be more comedic, we want it to be funny and more light-hearted. But Richard Donner wasn't having any of it. He wanted this to be a serious superhero movie. So they fired him, basically. Despite the fact that he had completed the first film and 70% of this film. They got rid of him. Then they hired Richard Lester to come in and basically film the rest of the film. I don't know how much of the script he tweaked, but it ended up being more light-hearted and more comedic, just as they wanted. But the film still came out pretty well. It got good reviews. And then in 2006, a Richard Donner cut was released, which actually brought back everything that Richard Donner had done and put it all together. But of course, he didn't finish the film, so they had to include scenes from Superman the movie, the original one. And yeah, both versions are meant to be good, but it should be noted that Richard Donner did not have any involvement in the Donner cut. I don't know who actually done that. So yeah, those are films which lost their directors but still turned out pretty well in the end. And looking in the chat, I seen that says how's it going, and I am Spartacus. It's going well. Thank you. So, moving on to the final part of the show, but first, just a reminder, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can subscribe to me. That would be great. 100 subscribers gets me a custom URL. That's something I really want. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at @the_GrantBurton, or you can go to forcefightgrant.wordpress.com for all of my written reviews. And this week I wrote a review for Mission Impossible Fallout, so check that out before I go into the full review now.